Welcome back. So, how did a bunch of citizens, including carpenters and sailors and farmers, run one of the most sophisticated societies in the Greek world? Well, first we have to say, of course, that not everyone was included. Like every other ancient city that we know of, um, there were people in slavery, which cannot and must not ever be excused. And like most of ancient settled world, not all, but most, women were excluded from full citizenship rights. So in that sense, Athens is not to be admired or to be copied, and was in that way not exceptional from most places in the ancient world that also were run by men and had slaves. However, what did make Athens exceptional was that poor people had equal political footing to rich people. Did it mean that money didn't matter and money couldn't buy you some kind of influence in democratic Athens? Of course it could, but the formal structures of the Athenian system did more to equalize the power of the wealthy and the power of the majority than any other system in the ancient world. And it functioned because every citizen was raised to a higher level of their cognitive capacities that all of us have. They weren't any smarter than us at birth, but they had a system that drew on the higher reaches of their capacities as citizens to think, to exchange knowledge, and to participate in collective decision making. So, of course, Athens had to pool together news from what was happening to be able to have a fact base to make decisions. They had plenty of people who were domain experts in sailing, money, water, military, and so not everyone had to become an expert in democracy, but they had to know where the experts were, especially experts that had that were trustworthy and could be listened to. And then they had what I call civic intelligence. Civic intelligence is a combination of cognitive habits or cognitive abilities that help you make better public decisions at a large scale. So the first is processes and norms. How do we do things? What are the processes by which we govern ourselves? Critical thinking. How do we separate good arguments and from flawed ones? How do we take perspective of people who might have a totally different set of knowledge on this issue than we do, or have a different set of moral judgments? How do we resolve and de-escalate conflict? How do we create consensus? How do we understand complex moral questions about different forms of justice or the roles of men and women, which were another issue that was fought out on the Athenian stage. So there were people definitely questioning the exclusion of women and even the institution of slavery. These were things that were questioned openly in the time of Socrates. And then more rare, you had people who were developing the skills of eloquence and persuasion at a large scale, and they weren't always rich people. Some of them came from very modest working backgrounds who rose to very high positions of authority, but these were not positions of permanent political power, but rather of informal influence that allowed certain members of the Athenian democracy to, like Pericles, to influence decisions over a long course of time, despite not having any kind of power close to a king or an emperor would have. So the system of Athens functioned because it helped encouraged each citizen to develop this civic intelligence to their greatest extent. And Athens became very powerful. Went from being a second-tier city to leading a coalition of Greek cities to fight off the invasion of Persia, to creating what became first an empire or a league of peers, city-states, and then Athens quickly became the most prominent member of that league, and creating new forms of knowledge, whether it was the Athenian Hippocrates, who created the first medical school that we know of, that we still take the Hippocratic Oath. That's what doctors take today. So the science of medicine, Hippocrates played a major role. The construction of the Parthenon, which is still standing today, was in this period. So in this period of the foundations of tragedy and comedy and medicine, science and breakthroughs in architecture was all happening in a city where the citizens ruled themselves. Now, again, not everybody was included in that citizenship, but it was power more widely distributed between rich and poor than in almost any other city of their size in the world. And this is the world in which Socrates was born. The golden age, we call, of Athens ends in the outbreak of a devastating war between Athens and its longtime rival, Sparta. Socrates serves in that war. Plato is born during that war. And let's tell you a little bit about Socrates. So he's the one, according to the later Roman writer Cicero, who brought philosophy down from the clouds and into the streets. His method was he wanted to investigate real questions of day-to-day importance. How should we be living, and are we valuing the right things? This is a society that had gotten very rich very fast, very powerful very fast, and Socrates thought that people were not valuing the right we're not living according to the right values. We're letting all this power transform them in negative ways. And so his method was not to stand on a street corner and tell people that they were living badly, but rather to ask questions. And so his method of elenkis, which is a Greek term that means a cooperative dialogue, a dialogue where we're arguing together for a common purpose, which is to find an answer to a question that we're both interested in. And Socrates would be most often in the form of a questioner, but sometimes the person would ask questions back to him, and they would investigate things like, what is courage? What is justice? Is poetry good for us, or does it manipulate us? And sometimes these dialogues, as they're written down later by Plato, will end in an impasse that we don't have an answer, and that we call that aporia. Socrates didn't write any of his philosophy down. It was entirely oral and lived in the present. And he would walk around barefoot in the agora and take people who often were the most comfortable kind of bourgeois citizens, and he would try to get them in a conversation. And it was very popular to watch Socrates having these dialogues, and he gathered quickly around him a lot of fans and admirers and students. And one of the things people liked about him was that he didn't try to dictate to you what you should think. His mother was a midwife, someone who helped people give birth, sage-femme. And Socrates would say, like his mother, he wanted to help you give birth to a truth already inside you. And so the dialogue was the ritual, the practice by which you would create new thoughts inside yourself and new insights that would be like giving birth to a truth that you already had. And he calls this maiousis, from the Greek word for being a midwife. And finally, Socrates was obviously a very intelligent guy, but he would often pose questions in a very simple way, as if he didn't know anything. And so the Greek word ironia gave us our word in English, irony, because sometimes when you're reading these dialogues, you think that Socrates must not be serious. He must have an opinion, but he claims not to have an opinion. He claims to pretend to know much less than he does. And you're going to see this in these dialogues. He starts from this almost naive position. Well, tell me what you think courage is, or what do you think justice is? And the debate is he doing this to set traps for people, or is he doing this because it's part of his maieutic method? So people debate that down to this day. The last thing we need to know is what is setting up the events of the Apology and the Crito, and so that'll be our last video.